Hello and good afternoon, everybody. It's a very sunny Wednesday here in the Bronx. It's 5:22, and I've been kind of MIA from the camera because I've been working on like music and art. What you find is I personally alternate between poetry, drawings, multimedia, and things like that. So this is just like one thing that I do. But I scour the internet, and I scour the internet for different types of theories, posits, postulations, things like this. But I would say I'm not just a student of life, but I'm a long life philosopher. I will always seek various information. Right now, something that's been just kind of consistently coming up as a topic is this idea of wounds. Now, this is significant, not just as something that's coming up, and I think it's coming up as a subject because we are living in a post-COVID world. We are living in a world that is filled with war, strife, people getting killed by the police. We have a president who a former president, speaking specifically of Trump, very openly just advocates for like sexual assault against women. So we are in a very sensitive and specific time. All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's a very sunny afternoon today in the Bronx. It's a Wednesday and 5:28. Thank you for joining me. Today's subject is actually on wounds, and the reason I'm bringing this up is I just keep on seeing these discussions on wounds online, and this is a book I wrote called My Heartbreaking Jibber Jabber. I do write under the pen name Leo Romeo Valentino. I also just write under a lot of pen names actually because I don't want my identity to be centralized. I just want to disperse my art, kind of forget about it, and then move on with my life. But in this book, which it was published in 2022, although I wrote what I'll be reading, which is called the Wound series. And the Wound series, I wrote this actually probably like around 2016. So this book represents a compilation of writings I had done since 2012, actually. And one of them was an exploration on wounds. It was because I was going through like my own sort of things as everybody does, and so I had to take a really close poetic examination as to like what were my own personal wounds, and that just sort of led me to this very like Immanuel Kant analysis of what is a wound. So not even getting lost in the sentimentality of it, but rather really trying to create a language which could get very close to an Immanuel Kant level of observation of what is a wound, but in poetic form. This is a series in 5 parts, and probably I'll do some animations to it and attach that later on, but I'm just gonna really like read them through. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Again, they're in 5 different series. So in the Wound series, there's the wound and existentialism. So even to think about what is this wound outside of myself, but that which is being imposed on myself. The second part is when the wound receives light, when light enters the wound, working through a wound. Because as Rumi says, the wound is where light enters. And that's something that, I'm a huge Rumi fan. I've been a huge Rumi fan. I had always been like referencing Rumi even in my MFA, like probably 5 years ago by now. And even my mentor was like, that's too old school. But for me, there's only the old school, and Rumi's like old school romantic poet. So a lot of this was very much influenced by Rumi's and based off of Rumi's the wound is where the light enters. So again, part 2, when the wound receives the light. So talking about the interaction, as that wound receives the light. Then when light enters the wound, working through the wound. So really taking each of those things step by step, in order to understand this whole psychological and metaphysical process of the wound interacting with the real world. All right. Number 3 is when they wound the wound from which light enters. So let's say hypothetically you healed, but people still fuck up your wound, right? So what do you do after that? That's number 3. Kind of simple, but also pretty complex situation. Number 4, when light enters the wound. So number 4 is called when light enters the wound. After number 3. When they wound the wound from which light enters, because like I said, you could supposedly go through a healing process, but then somebody comes and fucks up your shit. Number 3, when they wound the wound from which light enters. So number 4, when light enters the wound, when you actually move past a certain threshold where not even the hater bullshit really bothers you, right? So number 4, when light enters the wound. Then finally, number 5 is wound tolerates light. So yeah, you might have this wound and it might scar, but you're gonna have to interact with the real world. And there might be something out in the real world which triggers you, for example, but you're gonna have to really alchemize that spiritual energy. So number 5, wound tolerates light. Alright, so that's just my quick spiel. The wound series, again, I wrote this in probably 2008. I've always been interested in wounds and healing. I would say I'm a healer myself, through my friendships. I'll say past friendships, past relationships, situationships, really. The ways that I've been healing towards my own family. I've helped my father get through his bullshit that he was going through with his own parents, for example. I've helped my mother get through her past type stuff. Even my sisters with some of the stuff that they go through. I'm not airing specific things. We all have things that we go through. And again, being a poet, I'm very obsessed with ancient texts. Ancient texts have a lot to do with like healing, spirituality, things like this. So that's what I try to bring to people. Alright, so again, that's just my little spiel, and we're about to go into... Alright, so I'm going to begin reading with the wound series. This is number 1, the wound and existentialism. First, the wound is an open portal. Normal membranes are either open or closed. A symbiosis of similar or like genetic material on the same dimension of spatiality, sometimes permeable or completely closed, but they are recombinant of 2 similar worlds. A wound is a forced rupture between 2 dimensionally separate spaces, which can only recombine violently for both particles of the wound, an outside and inside, and an interstitial for each of the 2. Then there's the weapon, the assailant, that vehicle which inured the wound, and its supposed energy which directs the vector of the vehicle and the weapon. There's the boundary and force supposition of the wound, the weapon, the energy. The wound at one point is an amalgamation of pain and conjured hate, manifested on some material or spiritual plane. Normal existentialism supposes a self and time. A wound inserts itself into the existential question by incurring an unsolvable evil. Perhaps the answer lies in an equation between consciousness, the wound, that the wound doesn't become consciousness. Number 2, when the wound receives light, when light enters the wound, working through a wound. The wound was a patch of healthy cells, perhaps a patch of hair, a whole eye, perhaps the theft of love or belief. Wounds are very real and very personal, and they don't make sense to others. Others, this wound creates and has created. The wound exists at an intersection of personal and social perversions. to be the object of perversion, then disbelieved and ashamed, to carry the supposed burden of being the source for conjuring such evil, to swim in a desperation for language, a language of survival, a language to pinpoint the very modality of your planned personal extinction, a language of survivors, a survived language, to swim in the recurring dark mash of unknowing and knowing, and still not trusting, knowing and not knowing. A curse no child shall receive. Sometimes the wound was incurred at childhood, and so the paint of life becomes gray, and nothing matters to make sense. The wound is an alien imposition of evil consciousness, trying to overtake you. A wound's healing lays in understanding the nature of the wound, the weapon, and the backing energy behind the vehicle, though not necessarily the person. Once wounded, you can't give any power to the person. You have been forced into a spiritual understanding of yourself. Does a wound callous, absolve? Does it even have any power? I know wounds have caused me to hurt myself to worse states. Perhaps it is that blood, normally hidden behind the mask of skin, finally faces the sun, the light, the world. The blood is smiling open face for the world to see. Number 3, when they wound, the wound from which light enters. If you just wait through the curse that's directed at you, and give not even a peep of a curse, but do protect yourself, breathe, and open yourself to a source that will breathe you good, then open that aura. They attack the wound from which light enters. There's a genius on the loose, and he's already set his freedoms. Let the blessing occur. Let it wave through the sweet wandering of happiness, a sweet tide overpouring light and visible miracles that can be explained and said, and bless them. Let God be the divine intervention himself. Let God and God's signs be the in-between, where they hide and conspire. Even the spiritual invasions open an eye to their defeat, which is already in motion. A step back, 2 step backs, even 3 ain't bad. In fact, stay back there. Stay there. Empty your body of everything. Gain and seek nothing. The sweet tide is there, surrounding you, for you. They do penetrate this space because this protective space is that apparent. Baby boy, my dream, my wandering thing, the blessings will occur. The pain becomes a chamber to channel the wound into light. Alright, number 4, when light enters the wound. The wound as object becomes a preposition, a direction, that which is wound, the beloved, the wound. Wound to what? What was that horrid power I survived? How was I tested unquestionably and unasked and still survived? I am here and beautiful as ever. The wound wound to a tragedy which grants me, owes me, the love I create, the beauty I recognize, the souls I love and correct, lest they be wounded. When the wound heals, it becomes a vision against darkness, and light becomes the only appropriate counter weapon. Such weaponry is the divine gift. Number 5, wound tolerates light. When the wound tolerates light, ambles with consciousness or no consciousness, becomes nothing or a point to grasp and heal and then let go. When the wound has existed with time over time, not even the waves of time approach the wound. The wound belongs to consciousness. Like an inconvenient coal, the bearer is the supposed alchemist. What language then? A shift in consciousness has been incurred, and a new actuality, however not reality, imposes itself. But at what height? Higher than one's supreme consciousness? Does the wound become the tyrant and the tyranny? The bearer also bears a consciousness which conquers the absolute perversion, because there is survival, even if irrespective of the guilt. When the wound stabilizes enough, it begins to exist with light. The wound might shy away, allow the light to visit the light every other afternoon or every other Monday, but it eventually feels the natural goodness of light. And light is good, and existing is good. And one can exist with or without the wound, with or without light. Light is not necessary for the wound to heal, but as a wound, it is a rupture which has deformed to a specific structure. Your own body created a scar, but even scar is too harsh, because words are spiritual. They exist in memory, in visions, in triggers. It's a question of consciousness and the wound. The healing is a dimensional transformation of consciousness above and over, a complete conquest and reconquest and reclamation and final conscious victory over the wound. The alchemy is done. Gold was made. It is the only appropriate reparation in a world that can only perverse its treasures. That was the Wound series. Again, written around like 2016, published 2022. My heartbreaking jibber jabber, Leo Romeo Valentino. That's who that's one of my pen names. I'll try to get it in the cam. Is that it? Yeah, it says Wound series right there. And I think the biggest takeaway here, the healing is a dimensional transformation So your body becomes that which transmits all that energy and alchemizes it. Don't forget that. The healing is a dimensional transformation of consciousness, above and over, a complete conquest and reconquest and reclamation, and final conscious victory over the wound. The alchemy is done, gold was made. It is the only appropriate repatriation in a world that can only perverse its treasures. Alright, that was the wound series. I want to say thank you for any time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.